Hey guys, tonight we begin with the kind of royal tale that unravels beneath golden mosaics, between whispered scandals, and behind some very dramatic silk curtains. You're standing in Constantinople. Yes, that glittering, bustling, onion-scented melting pot of ancient worlds, and you're about to meet Empress Theodora. The perfume in the air is equal parts incense and ambition. The corridors of the great palace echo with hushed gossip about a girl who once danced for copper coins and now commands an empire with nothing but a look. You probably won't survive this era unless you enjoy public debates about heretical doctrine, unpredictable riots, and chariot teams that double as political parties. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing who's drifting off with me from where. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're wandering the palace corridors, sandals quiet on imported marble, trailing just behind a woman whose name once meant shame, and now means power. Empress Theodora's story isn't just rags to riches. It's more like provocative pantomime to theological warfare. Born to a bear trainer. Yes, a bear trainer. She was left scraping a living with her sisters in the lower rungs of Byzantine entertainment, which back then made modern reality TV look dignified. Historians still argue whether she actually performed a now infamous act involving live geese on stage, or if that's just another church-sponsored smear. Either way, you definitely wouldn't let your kids attend. But what's certain is that Theodora was magnetic. She knew how to command a crowd before she ever learned to command a court. Imagine her now, reclining in a mosaic-lined bath, steam curling around her, sipping something suspiciously medicinal. She's listening, always listening, because information is her real power. And when Justinian, heir to the imperial throne, meets her, it's not just love, it's strategy. He changes the law to marry her because marrying an exactress at that time was illegal. That's right, he rewrites Roman law just so he can put a ring on it. And let's not paint him as entirely noble. Justinian is exactly the ancient world's Mr. Darcy. But together, they become a political juggernaut, shaping laws, silencing uprisings, and terrifying the aristocracy who think she's still beneath them. One of the most striking moments in her rise isn't on a battlefield or in a royal audience. It's during the Nika riots, when half the city is in flames and Justinian is ready to flee. You, standing in the corner of the panic-lit council chamber, watch Theodora in her finest silks, cool, calm, terrifying. She declares, "Purple is a good color for a shroud." Translation: I'd rather die an empress than run like a peasant. Suddenly, even the toughest generals are nervously adjusting their armor. Quirky side note: Theodora also apparently had a thing for extreme spa treatments. One odd record claims she favored goose-fat facials and sat for hours in herbal steam baths so pungent they doubled as pest control. You wrinkle your nose just thinking about it. Still, she wasn't all sultry glances and imperial shade. Theodora pushed for women's rights, expanded protections for former prostitutes, and established convents for women trying to escape abusive marriages. That's not just optics, it's reform from someone who knew the system inside out. And yet the church despised her. Official histories, written mostly by monks with a flair for drama, describe her as lascivious, manipulative, and demonic. One particularly grumpy chronicler compared her to a harlot from Babylon, which was basically the 6th century version of a Twitter pylon. But here's the twist. Theodora dies young, likely of cancer, and her husband Justinian, the lawmaker emperor, never remarries. He continues ruling, often invoking her name in political decisions, as if she's still beside him. You can almost hear her whispering over his shoulder. Even now, her face stares back at you from the glittering mosaics in Ravenna, head tilted, eyes focused, halo just barely brighter than her earrings. Is it piety? Is it power? Or is it both? And if you listen closely in those golden chambers of the Hagia Sophia, with wind swirling through the high domes. It almost sounds like silk brushing against stone. Or perhaps it's just the echo of Theodora, still walking the palace corridors in purple. You've followed the scent of sandalwood and Crusader steel all the way west now, and tonight your footsteps crunch through the dust of Antioch. It's 1148. The Second Crusade is teetering toward disaster, and somehow, amid the chaos, you found your way into the war tent of one Alina of Aquitaine. She's not wearing armor. She doesn't need to. Her weapons are embroidered with gold thread, and her tongue's sharp enough to slice through plate mail anyway. Alina, Queen of France at this point in her winding resume, has journeyed over 2,000 miles across hostile terrain just to accompany her husband, King Louis VII, on this doomed adventure. And let's be real, you suspect she mostly came along to make sure he didn't embarrass himself too much. Spoiler, he did. You sit quietly at the edge of the tent, the linen walls fluttering with desert wind, and watch Alina work her magic. She's just received a letter. It's from her uncle, Raymond of Antioch, a man rumored to be not only one of the sharpest strategists in the region, but also perhaps a bit too fond of his niece. Historians still argue whether their relationship was scandalous or simply close in that charmingly uncomfortable medieval way. Either way, tongues wagged furiously, and Louis, he was not amused. But Alina didn't care. She thought the king's holy war was a mess. She wanted strategy, alliances, and a bit of competent leadership, not half-baked pilgrim drama wrapped in divine excuses. Raymond offered her exactly that. A seat at the planning table, influence, and maybe, just maybe, a whispered promise of autonomy. But Louis saw something else, possibly the threat of infidelity, possibly the threat of her thinking independently, probably both. So, naturally, he panicked, forced Alina to leave Antioch against her will, and returned to France with his royal dignity shredded. Let's pause a moment. You've got to picture Alina on that journey home, mud-splattered, furious, utterly done with the French court, and planning her next move. Because Alina isn't the type to accept exile quietly. This is the same woman who, years earlier, had taken control of the vast duchy of Aquitaine at age 15. And when she married Louis, she didn't just become queen. She brought one of the richest territories in Europe with her and made sure everyone knew it. You get the sense she didn't just marry kings, she collected them. Now back in France, the royal marriage is disintegrating faster than a parchment left in the rain. Alina wants out. She's tried twice to get a papal annulment. No luck. But then fate, or perhaps divine comedy, intervenes. The Pope himself falls ill. Alina visits. She pleads. The Pope, probably high on medieval medicine and goodwill, insists the couple must stay together, and bizarrely gives them a marriage bed as a gift. And you think your in-laws are intrusive. 9 months later, miracle of miracles, a daughter is born, but not a son, and Alina, still not interested. Finally, in 1152, she gets her annulment. The reason given, consanguinity. Yes, too closely related, even though the church knew that when they married, even though half the aristocracy had the same family tree copied and pasted. But here, where it gets even juicier, 2 months after the annulment, Alina marries Henry of Anjou. That's right. She wastes no time, and Henry, he's a decade younger, fiery, ambitious, and not yet King of England, but very much on his way. As you trail Alina now through the echoing halls of Poitiers, you begin to notice a pattern. Wherever she goes, she rewrites the rules. She bears Henry 8 children, including the future Richard the Lionheart and the infamously moody King John. But domestic bliss, not quite. By the 1170s, Alina is backing a rebellion against her own husband. She's siding with their sons. Family dinners must have been a riot. Caught, imprisoned, locked away for over a decade. Yet even from her confinement, she controls correspondence, arranges marriages, and influences politics across Europe. That's not just stubbornness. That's queenly endurance. And there's something else. During her time in Poitiers, Alina supposedly presided over a court of love, a romantic tribunal where troubadours, poets, and noble ladies debated affairs of the heart. Historians still debate whether this court really functioned as described or if it's just one giant medieval fanfiction circle. But the image remains. A leaner draped in velvet, dispensing judgments on love like a Renaissance Dr. Phil. You find yourself sitting cross-legged on cool stone, listening to her soft voice pronounce whether a true knight may love more than one lady, or whether love can exist within marriage. Her smile, unreadable. Even as an old woman, Elinor crosses mountains, arranges a royal ransom for Richard, and outlives most of her enemies. She dies in 1204, having ruled, rebelled, and reigned over more kingdoms than most men in her age. And somewhere in the wind that sweeps through the vineyards of Aquitaine, her name lingers, not just as a queen, but as a force. You're back in Paris now, but it's not the romantic postcard version. The air smells more like horse sweat and old wine than perfume, and the halls of the Palais de la Cité are colder than they should be, especially when you're keeping secrets. You're packing quietly outside a locked chamber where Queen Isabella of France is whispering plans that will shake England to its core. Tonight, your candle flickers beside a name often spoken in fear and fascination. Isabella, the she-wolf of France. Daughter of Philip IV, the same king who dissolved the Knights Templar and taxed the church until the Pope literally dropped dead. Isabella didn't grow up among bedtime stories and lullabies. She grew up with political chessboards and knives in the dark. When she's married off at age 12 to England's Edward II, she already knows the game she's playing. And oh boy, does she play it well. Historians still argue whether Isabella was truly a seductress or simply a survivor, but what's certain is that her marriage was complicated. Edward II wasn't particularly interested in her. Instead, he lavished affection publicly and excessively on a noble named Piers Gaveston. You shift uncomfortably in your velvet seat as courtiers whisper behind bejeweled fans. Gaveston wears the Queen's jewelry, copies her fashion, and openly insults the nobility. Isabella, she waits. At first, eventually when Gaveston is exiled and then executed by Edward's own barons, Isabella might have breathed a quiet sigh of relief. But Edward's next favorite, Hugh Despenser, makes the last guy look like a summer fling. Despenser isn't just a distraction, he's dangerous. He manipulates Edward, steals land from Isabella, and essentially rules the country by proxy. You tiptoe down a corridor in the Tower of London, where Isabella is quietly, carefully removing her royal mask. In 1325, sent to France as a peace envoy, she makes her move. Instead of returning to England, she stays, conveniently. And while there, she meets a disgruntled English exile named Roger Mortimer. Their relationship, let's just say, raises eyebrows. Rumors swirl. Are they plotting war? Are they lovers? Are they both? A contemporary chronicler called them new king and new queen. Subtle. You sit near the fireplace in their borrowed French manor house, watching Mortimer pore over maps while Isabella reads coded letters. She's gathering allies. She's gathering ships. She's gathering nerve. In 1326, they land in England, small force, big ambition. Towns open their gates. Nobles defect. The Despensers are hunted down. The elder Despenser hanged. The younger, well, let's just say he's introduced to one of the more creative punishments in English history. And Edward, the king flees, hides, is caught, imprisoned. Here, where it gets foggy, historians still debate whether Isabella ordered Edward's murder the following year. The infamous story involves a red-hot poker and a rather uncomfortable end, but many suspect that's more legend than literal truth. Still, the fact that it's even plausible tells you a lot about the climate she created. For 4 brief years, Isabella rules England as regent for her young son, Edward III, with Mortimer at her side. She holds court, wears the crown, controls the treasury, and for once people bow to her not just out of fear, but out of real respect. But here's the twist. Power, once grasped, rarely stays gentle. Mortimer becomes overconfident, starts issuing decrees as if he were king. Edward III, now a teenager, sees what's happening. One dark night in 1330, he leads a surprise coup. Mortimer is captured, tried, and hanged like a common traitor. Isabella, not executed but retired, sent to live out her days in quiet luxury at Castle Rising, and you'd think the story ends there, but no. In her later years, she becomes almost serene, wears nun-like robes, collects religious relics, and orders paintings of herself as a pious widow. But tucked beneath those embroidered sleeves is the memory of a woman who unseated a king, ruled an empire, and reshaped royal power in her own image. And the best part, she outlived almost every man who tried to control her, including Edward, including Mortimer, including the chroniclers who tried to paint her as a monster. Now, as the wind whistles outside the crumbling stone walls of her final retreat, you might imagine her smiling, not sweetly, but knowingly. Because some wolves don't howl, they wait. You find yourself in the sun-drenched gardens of Renaissance Ferrara, Italy, where the scent of orange blossoms mingles with a whisper of scandal. The name Lucrezia Borgia drifts through the scented air like a faint, elusive perfume, partly sweet, partly dangerous. You're clutching a small goblet, half filled with spiced wine, while listening to the court's hushed chatter. Was she the innocent daughter caught in a web of family ambition, or the poisoner herself? Lucrezia's reputation is a curious mix of fact, fiction, and centuries of dramatic retellings. She was born into the notoriously powerful Borgia family, the kind of dynasty that makes your average royal soap opera look like amateur hour. Her father, Pope Alexander VI, was as much a political kingpin as a religious leader, and her brothers, equally adept at intrigue, love affairs, and backroom deals. Historians still argue whether Lucrezia ever actually wielded poison as deftly as the legends suggest, or if she was more of a pawn in her family's ambitious chess game. But the stories have stuck. A goblet here, a mysterious death there, and a collection of lovers who tended to expire under suspicious circumstances. You settle beside the marble fountain, where courtiers murmur about her 3 marriages, each arranged to secure political alliances. The first, to Giovanni Sforza, ended in scandalous annulment, rumored to be fueled by accusations so absurd that even your modern mind raises an eyebrow. Then came Alfonso of Aragon, whose assassination is whispered to have been orchestrated by Lucrezia's own family. And finally, Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, who seems to have been her true love, a man who looked past the rumors and treated her like the formidable woman she was. In the private chambers, Lucrezia was more than a political bride. She was a patron of the arts and an educated woman fluent in several languages. You imagine her reading poetry aloud, her voice a soft melody in the candlelight, weaving both charm and cunning. And yet, the darker tales linger. One story tells of her possessing a small, hidden vial of poison she carried in a ring, a trinket passed down through generations of Borgias. You can almost feel the cold metal against your skin as you imagine the delicate balance of power, seduction, and danger at play. Interestingly, some recent scholarship suggests that Lucrezia was often used as a scapegoat, her name tarnished by jealous rivals and later sensationalists. You wonder if her gentle smile was the original mask of a woman who knew all too well how to survive in a family where loyalty was as fickle as fortune. The scent of jasmine drifts in from the gardens as you stand, contemplating a woman who embodied both the softness of silk and the sharp edge of a dagger. Lucrezia Borgia, a queen in her own right, wrapped in mystery and myth. You're now trekking through the misty highlands of Scotland, where the chill in the air seems to carry centuries of whispered legends. At the heart of it all is Mary, Queen of Scots, a name wrapped in as much mystery as the fog curling over the heather. Tonight, you walk the cold stone halls of Loch Leven Castle, where Mary spent one of her darkest imprisonments, pondering her tumultuous life. Mary's story begins with a fairy tale promise. Crowned queen as an infant, She was whisked away to France to be raised among nobles and princes. You can almost hear the soft rustle of silk gowns as she learned courtly manners, languages, and, most importantly, how to survive the endless games of politics and betrayal that come with royal blood. Historians still argue whether Mary's charm was her greatest weapon or her Achilles' heel. She was known for her beauty and magnetic personality, but her marriages, especially to Lord Darnley, spiraled into dangerous territory. Darnley, charming yet volatile, ended up alienating much of the Scottish nobility, driving Mary into a tight corner where every move felt like walking on thin ice. As you peer out from the cold stone window, you imagine Mary packing restlessly, the weight of a crown heavy on her brow. The infamous murder of David Rizzio, her trusted secretary, happened right here. Rizzio's brutal death in her presence was not just a personal tragedy, but a terrifying reminder of the treacherous politics swirling around her. You hear soft whispers that Mary might have been involved in plots that historians still debate to this day. Was she complicit in the murder of Darnley? Was she a pawn or a player in the deadly dance of Scottish power? No one can say for sure. Mary's subsequent marriage to the Earl of Bothwell only deepened the intrigue and scandal, leading to her forced abdication and eventual flight to England. There, her cousin Elizabeth held her captive for nearly 2 decades. You can feel the cold walls of Fotheringhay Castle closing in as you envision Mary's long captivity, days filled with quiet despair, whispered prayers, and a growing sense of betrayal. Despite her tragic end, Mary's legacy lives on. Her life, a tangled tapestry of love, power, passion, and peril. You leave the castle with a chill that's not just from the stone beneath your feet, but from the echoes of a queen who dared to live on her own terms in a world determined to break her. You find yourself drifting slowly through the shadowed corridors of the Forbidden City in 15th century Ming China. The polished jade floors gleam faintly under lantern light, while outside, the gardens whisper secrets of the imperial court. Tonight, your guide is Empress Wu Zetian's distant cousin, or so the story goes, a woman named Empress Cixi, whose name carries the same intoxicating mix of power, intrigue, and whispered scandal. Cixi's rise from a low-ranking concubine to the de facto ruler of China is a tale that's equal parts patience, cunning, and ruthless determination. You listen as courtiers debate her legacy. Was she a tyrant who clung to power through manipulation, or a savvy stateswoman who stabilized an empire on the brink of collapse? Historians still argue about the exact role Cixi played in major reforms and the fall of the Qing dynasty. But what's certain is her ability to master the art of subtlety in a court ruled by tradition and strict protocol. You picture her sitting behind a carved screen, quietly orchestrating affairs of state while the emperor's court buzzes with oblivious gossip. Unlike many queens who wielded swords or crowns, Cixi's weapon was patience, slow, steady influence that shaped emperors and ministers alike. There's a quirky tidbit whispered among palace staff. Cixi was fond of extravagant parties and is said to have held banquets featuring rare delicacies like bear paws and shark fin soup, culinary excess that reflected her status and flair. Yet beneath the silk robes and jade jewelry was a woman keenly aware of the fragility of power and the dangers lurking behind every smile. She survived assassination attempts, court intrigues, and political upheavals, maintaining her grip through decades that redefined China's history. As you walk past the glimmering porcelain vases and silk tapestries, you can't help but admire Cixi's quiet ferocity, a reminder that power in the palace often moves not through the clatter of swords, but the silence of whispers. You step lightly onto the cobblestones of Edo period Japan, where cherry blossoms drift lazily in the spring breeze, and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer rings through the quiet streets. Here, in the refined world of the Tokugawa shogunate, you find Oyo, sometimes called Sujinin, the woman whose life was as delicately woven as the silk kimonos she wore, yet just as strong. Oyo's story is one of subtle power and careful survival, set against the rigid hierarchy of feudal Japan. Married to Tokugawa Hidetada, the second shogun, she was mother to the third, Tokugawa Iemitsu. But her influence stretched far beyond motherhood. She was a diplomatic bridge between warring clans, a keeper of peace through marriage alliances, and a woman quietly maneuvering the male-dominated world of samurai politics. Historians still debate just how much influence Oyo wielded behind the scenes. Was she a puppet master or a devoted mother? What's clear is that her family's position helped cement the Tokugawa dynasty's long reign. Imagine the scent of incense filling the room as she hosts court ladies and negotiates alliances over cups of tea, her voice calm but resolute. She's not the kind of woman to wield a sword, but her power lies in the intricate social dance of the period, where honor and obligation shaped every move. A lesser-known fact: Oyo was reportedly devoted to Buddhism and patronized temples that later became cultural centers in Kyoto. Her spiritual pursuits added a softer dimension to her otherwise formidable persona. And here's the intriguing bit. Some stories hint that she secretly advised her son on governance, encouraging policies that maintained peace and stability in turbulent times. Historians still argue how much she shaped Tokugawa Japan's political landscape, but her legacy is undeniable. As the cherry blossoms fall around you, you sense the quiet strength of a woman who ruled not with a crown, but with grace, wisdom, and a careful hand on the threads of power. You find yourself wandering the bustling streets of 18th century Ottoman Istanbul, where the call to prayer echoes softly over markets filled with fragrant spices and vibrant silks. Here, within the Topkapi Palace's ornate walls, you catch a glimpse of Kursum Sultan, a woman whose influence shaped the empire's destiny like the steady flow of the Bosporus itself. Kursum's journey is nothing short of remarkable. An ordinary Greek girl who became one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. As the favorite consort and later wife of Sultan Ahmed I, she navigated the labyrinth of palace politics with sharp wit and a calm demeanor that belied the fierce ambitions simmering beneath. Historians still debate how much Kursum directly controlled the empire's affairs during her regency for her sons and grandson. Some paint her as a political mastermind who wielded power with subtlety. Others suggest she was more a caretaker of the dynasty's fragile balance. You imagine her sitting in the harem's inner chambers, surrounded by silk cushions, her eyes steady as she counseled young sultans, her sons, on ruling a sprawling empire. She was known to foster alliances between factions and secure the empire's borders through deft diplomacy. Here's a quirky detail for you. Kursum was known to have used herbal remedies and ancient recipes, possibly handed down from her Greek heritage, to maintain her health and vitality well into her later years, a touch of home in a foreign court. And yet her life was not without peril. The Ottoman court was a hotbed of intrigue, and Kursum faced multiple assassination attempts. Ultimately, her fate was sealed by palace rivals in a dramatic coup, reminding you that even queens in silk are not immune to the dangers of power. Walking through the gardens where tulips bloom, you feel the echo of Kursum's legacy, a woman who rose from humble beginnings to hold the reins of an empire, proving that sometimes the quietest voices make the loudest impact. You drift slowly through the misty fjords of 10th century Scandinavia, where the air tastes of salt and pine, and the sound of crashing waves echoes against rugged cliffs. In this harsh, windswept land, you meet Gunhild, the mother of kings, a Viking queen whose story is woven with magic, power, and whispered legends that blur history and myth. Gunhild was not your typical queen. Married to Eric Bloodaxe, King of Norway, she was a fierce presence on the throne, wielding influence in a world dominated by swords and sagas. The sagas themselves paint her as a sorceress, a cunning strategist, and a queen who would stop at nothing to secure her family's rule. Historians still argue whether Gunhild was truly the dark enchantress the sagas claim, or if those tales were shaped by political propaganda from her enemies. What is clear is that she was a formidable figure in Viking politics, respected and feared in equal measure. You imagine her in a longhouse, wrapped in furs, her voice low and commanding as she plots alliances and countermoves. There's a story of her using magic and curses against rivals, but it's just as likely these are metaphors for her strategic mind and unyielding will. One quirky detail. Some legends say she brewed potions from rare Nordic herbs, blending practical healing with mystical lore. A fascinating glimpse into the overlap between medicine and magic in Viking culture. Gunhild's life was turbulent, filled with battles, exile, and the constant threat of betrayal. Yet she remained a central figure until her death, leaving behind a legacy that echoes through Norse tales and history alike. As you watch the northern lights shimmer above the fjords, you sense the spirit of a queen who mastered both the tangible and the mysterious, ruling not just with iron, but with a touch of the arcane. You find yourself wandering through the fragrant courtyards of Mughal India, where the scent of jasmine mingles with the distant rhythm of sitar strings. The sun warms the marble of the Taj Mahal under construction, a monument soon to symbolize love and loss. Here reigns Nur Jahan, the most powerful empress in Mughal history, whose cleverness and charm reshaped an empire. Nur Jahan began life as a Persian noblewoman, but rose to unprecedented heights as the wife of Emperor Jahangir. You can almost hear the soft rustle of her silks as she walks through the royal gardens, her eyes gleaming with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew how to turn influence into power. Historians still argue whether Nur Jahan's political acumen overshadowed her husband's rule or merely complemented it. What's certain is that she issued coins in her name, a remarkable testament to her authority, and managed state affairs with skill and grace. Imagine her surrounded by poets, architects, and courtiers, her laughter mingling with the clinking of teacups as she hosts gatherings that shaped the cultural life of the empire. She was a patron of the arts, an innovator in fashion, and reputedly the first woman to design and wear embroidered shoes. A lesser-known tidbit: Nur Jahan was a skilled hunter, reportedly leading royal hunting parties on horseback, an unusual pastime for women of her era, adding an adventurous flair to her already fascinating persona. Yet behind her elegance lay a steely resolve. She outmaneuvered rivals, secured her son's succession, and maintained a delicate balance between tradition and change during a turbulent period. As you stroll beneath the towering cypress trees, you feel the presence of an empress who ruled not just with a scepter, but with wit, charm, and an unshakable will. A queen whose legacy still sparkles like the jewels in her crown. You're stepping into the quiet, candle-lit chambers of 17th century France, where the opulence of Versailles dazzles and intrigues mingle beneath golden chandeliers. Here, Anne of Austria quietly holds the strings of power, her soft-spoken influence shaping the fate of the French monarchy during one of its most turbulent eras. Born a Spanish princess, Anne married King Louis XIII, a union marked more by political alliance than romance. Yet, behind the formal veneer, she became a master of subtlety, navigating court factions and religious tensions with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. Historians still debate the extent of Anne's political power, especially during her regency for her young son, Louis XIV. Some credit her as the architect of France's eventual rise, while others see her as a cautious caretaker maintaining the fragile peace. You imagine her walking the labyrinthine gardens, whispering plans to Cardinal Mazarin, her trusted advisor, while the court buzzes with gossip and intrigue. Anne's life was marked by loss and resilience, including the tragic deaths of several children and the pressure of a strained marriage. Here's a curious detail. Anne was known for her love of music and poetry, often patronizing artists whose works subtly reflected her political ideals, a soft power wielded through culture. And amidst the grandeur, Anne's personal life carried its own whispers, rumors of secret meetings and alliances that historians still ponder, adding layers of mystery to her quiet reign. As the evening shadows lengthen over the palace, you sense the steady heartbeat of a queen whose gentle strength and savvy behind-the-scenes maneuvering helped lay the foundation for the Sun King's dazzling reign. You find yourself amid the fragrant spice markets and palm-shaded courtyards of 19th century Zanzibar, where the warm Indian Ocean breeze carries tales of trade and power. Here, you meet Sayyida Salmi, known more famously as Emily Root, a princess who defied conventions to live a life between worlds. Born into the ruling family of Zanzibar and Oman, Sayyida Salmi's story is one of daring escape and cultural transformation. You picture her gazing out over the turquoise waters, dreaming of freedom from the strict confines of palace life and arranged marriages. Historians still debate whether her decision to flee her royal duties and convert to Christianity was an act of personal rebellion or a complicated negotiation of identity in a rapidly changing world. Either way, her memoirs offer one of the rare first-hand accounts of life inside an Arab royal household in the 1800s. You imagine the scent of cardamom and frankincense as she writes, reflecting on her childhood filled with elaborate rituals, political intrigues, and the strict expectations placed on royal women. Her narrative brings to life the tension between duty and desire, a timeless theme. A quirky tidbit: after moving to Germany, Sayyida Salmi embraced European fashions and customs with a surprising zeal, even designing her own dresses and hosting salons that fascinated local aristocrats. Yet her life was not without sadness. The longing for her homeland and family remained a quiet ache beneath her new identity. Her story is a bridge between cultures, a reminder of the fluidity of identity long before globalization became a buzzword. As the sun sets over Zanzibar's palm trees, you feel the bittersweet spirit of a princess who rewrote her own story, stepping boldly into the unknown and reminding us all of the power of choice. You wander the candle-lit halls of Renaissance Italy, where the scent of freshly ground pigments and polished wood fills the air. Here, among the winding streets of Florence, you encounter Lucrezia Borgia, a woman whose name still sends a shiver of intrigue through history's corridors. Born into the notorious Borgia family, Lucrezia's life was a whirlwind of politics, art, and scandal. While often portrayed as a pawn or a poisoner, the truth is far more nuanced. You picture her at a lavish banquet, surrounded by scholars, artists, and courtiers, her smile hiding a mind sharper than any dagger. Historians still argue about Lucrezia's real role in her family's dark reputation. Was she a willing participant in their schemes, or an innocent caught in the crossfire of ruthless power plays? What is certain is that she navigated her world with intelligence and grace, becoming a respected duchess in her own right. Imagine the soft clinking of glass as she raises a toast to alliances sealed by marriage and the delicate dance of Renaissance diplomacy. A lesser-known fact: Lucrezia was a patron of the arts and a supporter of early humanist scholars, fostering culture amidst chaos. And there's that infamous rumor, one that historians debate endlessly, about her supposed use of poison. Was it a political smear or a reality? The answer remains hidden, much like the fatting frescoes in the halls she once walked. As you stroll through the Florentine gardens, you sense the complex layers of a woman who, despite her family's dark shadow, carved out her own space in history, blending power and vulnerability in equal measure. You drift through the candle-lit corridors of 18th century France, where powdered wigs and silk gowns rustle softly against marble floors. Here reigns Madame de Pompadour, the king's mistress whose influence extended far beyond the boudoirs of Versailles into the very heart of French politics and culture. Madame de Pompadour was not just a charming companion to Louis XVI. She was a patron of the arts, a savvy political advisor, and a trendsetter whose tastes shaped an entire era. You imagine the delicate clinking of porcelain teacups during her salons, where artists, writers, and thinkers gathered under her patronage. Historians still debate the extent of her political power. Did she genuinely influence state affairs, or was her role more about style and social grace? Regardless, her impact on French culture and court life is undeniable. Here's a quirky detail. Madame de Pompadour reportedly introduced the now famous Meissen porcelain to France and inspired the creation of delicate pompadour hairstyles that women still emulate centuries later. Yet behind her elegance lay a woman acutely aware of the precariousness of her position. She faced rivals, court gossip, and the ever-present risk of falling out of favor with the king. As you wander the fragrant gardens of Versailles, you sense the quiet strength and intelligence of a woman who turned charm into power, proving that sometimes influence comes with a smile rather than a crown. You step softly into the twilight of early 20th century Europe, where the air carries the scent of revolution and change. Here, in the fatting grandeur of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you encounter Empress Zita, a woman whose life bridged old-world monarchy and the modern age with grace and quiet determination. Empress Zita was the last empress of Austria, married to Emperor Charles I during the empire's final days. You imagine her in the vast palace halls, her voice calm as she advised her husband through war and political upheaval, trying to hold together an empire unraveling at the seams. Historians still debate her role. Was she a staunch conservative clinging to fatting traditions, or a compassionate leader advocating for peace and reform? Either way, she was a steadfast partner in one of Europe's most turbulent eras. A lesser-known fact: Zita was multilingual, fluent in several languages, and deeply involved in charitable works, often visiting hospitals and refugee camps, a hands-on approach rare for royalty of her time. Despite the collapse of the empire, exile, and personal loss, she maintained her dignity and faith, embodying resilience in the face of history's relentless tide. As night falls over the old palace, you feel the gentle strength of a woman who stood quietly at the crossroads of history, reminding you that even in the end of an era, grace and courage endure. The stories we've wandered through tonight, from whispered secrets in grand halls to the quiet strength behind silk curtains, remind you that history's queens were far more than just names in dusty books. They were living, breathing people, full of contradictions, desires, and dreams, just like you. Some were bold, some were tender, some walked the razor's edge between power and peril. And yet, beneath the layers of intrigue and rumor, their stories carry a timeless truth: the complexity of being human. As you let your mind drift, imagine the soft glow of candlelight flickering one last time, the distant murmur of a medieval court settling into night, the faint rustle of silk and parchment. The world outside may be vast and loud, but here, in this quiet moment, you're safely tucked away in a gentle embrace of history's softer side. No need to rush or wrestle with the tangled webs of scandal and power. Let your thoughts soften, the past folding gently into the present as your eyelids grow heavy. Whether you dream of castles, distant seas, or quiet gardens, know that these stories will wait for you, always ready to unfold again when you need them. So take a deep breath, feel the calm settle in your chest, and let the quiet rhythm of centuries past lull you toward rest. Sleep well, knowing that even the most perverted queens of medieval history had moments of peace, just like you will tonight. Sweet dreams.